Luquier is certainly a fan favorite card, so it's super exciting to see it back in standard format with D-BT08. And I've been excited to test this one out because this is an insane value card. Just being able to call 3 cards from Soul and potentially give them power is really, really strong for only a counterblast. I don't even really count putting a card from hand into Soul because most of the time you just call that card anyway that you would put, and you actually get more flexibility and versatility by putting it into Soul anyway, because now you have the whole option of what you have from Soul to call. It does limit by different grades, but that's certainly not a problem. That's just a deck building challenge, which honestly I don't think is one that's too difficult to work around. And then the ability at the end of turn to put 2 rear guards into Soul to draw a card is phenomenal to filter your deck for Persona Ride copies or just other great cards, defensive cards, offensive cards, you name it. Just be able to dig deeper in your deck is always great, and getting those 2 cards out of the way from removal effects means that you can easily reuse them on following turns, because let's be real here, you're going to want to use Luquier's effect turn after turn. For the ride line, I run the Ionella as the starter. You realistically can run any starter, but I chose to be thematic. For the grade 1, I run the Irina, just because just checking top 7, thin a card from a Pale Moon card, which are all normal units, and putting it to Soul just means we're setting up better for Luquier's ability, and we certainly have plenty of cards that we want to get into Soul to set up with. And it does have a secondary skill when placed to Soul Charge 1, so if we do choose to call it off of Luquier's ability, you do get an extra bonus, but frankly, we have better grade 1s, so I don't think this skill will be too relevant. For the grade 2, I run Lillian. We kind of have to run a Pale Moon card for running Irina, and honestly, like most of these ride lines just help the grade 3 best, so I see no reason to deviate from it. But Lillian here, just a Soul Charge and put a card from Soul into hand, I think is really powerful. It doesn't matter what we really Soul Charge, so it does. If it's a PG Persona Ride copy, we can just add it back. But this also synergizes really well with Irina, because we can search out, say, a Persona Ride copy, put it to Soul, and add it back to hand with Lillian once we ride up into Luquier. That is really great value. Just more filtering through the deck, gathering your pieces, using that Soul as an extra hand is phenomenal. And it also has a phenomenal secondary ability. Being a 15k attacker or 10k shield is great. This is definitely going to be a primary call target with the Luquier's ability on the first grade 3 turn. Again, just throwing out a 15k attacker that can then intercept for 10k shield, really strong, makes this deck look like a good beatdown deck, but also be really tanky. For the main deck, of course, I run 3 copies of Persona Ride. That's pretty self-explanatory. But I also run 4 of the Hurry and Join Silverthorn Servants, a phenomenal order card, which is super versatile as it can also be played from Soul, so you're not minusing 1 from hand when you play it, which I think is super neat. And just giving you a 4th attack is phenomenal with this deck, and you'll see there are plenty of cards that synergize with it. It has to be specifically a Pale Moon card, but the best card to call is a Pale Moon card, so that is not an issue at all. It does cost a counterblast, so we will need to be mindful of damage denial, as we will definitely want to use Luquier's ability, and then that'll cost us counterblast too. But we do have a countercharger here, which I'll go over in just a moment. So that countercharger is the Urselchi here. Just when it's placed by your Vanguard's ability, you can, from Soul, you can Soul Blast 1 to countercharge 1. That Soul Blast shouldn't be an issue. We got ways to get more cards into Soul, and just to countercharge, it means that we can work off of 1 counterblast in a turn, which is phenomenal. So definitely in the later stages of the game, this will probably be my primary call target for my grade 3. So just had to find a way to get it to Soul. Only 2 copies because I think there are plenty of ways. And again, I don't foresee needing it until later in the game. So I have plenty of time to draw into it with all the filter effects, some blind Soul charges, and at worst, I can just throw into Soul with Luquier's ability to put a card from hand into Soul. And we got other cards also to filter from hand. So I see no problem getting to Soul. So 2 copies seemed appropriate to me. And also, I don't really want to run too many more cards without shield value as well, because we're already at 7 cards in the main deck. This will put it up to 9. Moving over to the grade 2s, I run 3 additional copies of Lillian because this is just a phenomenal card, 10k shield from hand, and if I ever need to call it down, 15k attacker's not too bad. I also run 4 copies of the Rising Dragon. This is our other hand filter card. When placed on rearguard circle, just put a card from hand to Soul to draw a card. Phenomenal way to filter out your hand, dig deeper into your deck. It's great for all the same reasons as I mentioned with Luquier putting a card from hand to Soul, as well as just all the other reasons why I said just filtering out the deck is phenomenal. And then on top of that, it's just a big attacker. Using Luquier's ability, it will be a 20k attacker, meaning this is a phenomenal card to call from hand as a secondary attacker, or be the grade 2 you call from Luquier in later turns. But it's even better once we get the order involved, because once we use that, it's actually a 30k attacker all on its own, and that's nuts. So really powerful attacker, definitely going to be our main call target, and I think in the late game, this is definitely be what I want to be on my board as both my attackers, as I can swing with 1 rear guard, put to Soul with the order's ability, call out a Rising Dragon. Now I've got 2 Rising Dragons that can attack for 30k all on its own. That's not including Persona Ride, boost, triggers, whatever. So that seems really powerful as a great way to finish off and really adds to this deck, I feel like, being a good beatdown bulky deck. Moving over to the grade 1s, I run 4 copies of Brainwash Swirler just to kind of round out the list here as some good grade 1s to call, because off of Luquier, we're calling a grade 2, grade 3, and grade 1. We do have an option to switch ones out for a grade 0, but I imagine most of the time I'm going to be wanting to call 1 through 3, and therefore I might have to round out my board with additional grade 1, and Brainwash Swirler is just really great for that. A free soul charge to help pay for the counter charge and another one of our cards, as well as just being a 13k booster when you do place it. Not many other soul charge synergies, but this one just seemed the best. It's proven itself time and time again. Just seemed like an obvious include, and I can always just put it into Soul with Luquier's ability and then kind of replace it with something else later on if need be. I also run 3 Luxual Songsters. This will be a great card to call from Soul under Persona Ride, as it becomes a 13k booster with the ability when the attack and boost hit to put Soul draw a card. More ways to filter, get cards off a board for your opponent to, if their opponent has some control. That's really powerful. And this card isn't always going to be the one we call. We do have the Breathing Dragon here, which we'll get to in a second. But this one, again, under Persona Ride, where I don't need as much power, we kind of already have it. Just having that extra on-hit pressure, especially for my weakest attack, seems really good with a good skill like that. I mean, just think of Inlet Pulse. This is just a more conditional Inlet Pulse, but that still doesn't mean it's not a bad card and you shouldn't include it. Speaking of Breathing Dragon, I might have said Writhing Dragon, I meant Breathing Dragon. This card is going to be the one to call outside of Persona Ride, especially on our first grade 3 turn, as it just, for a Soul Blast, gives your Vanguard the ability to give all your front row rear guards power plus 5,000. And I think that will be kind of necessary, especially on our first grade 3 turn, or really outside of Persona Ride, maybe when I don't have my Rising Dragon set up, as power then is a bit lacking, and this card can help make up for it. But under Persona Ride, I don't think I really need the power, hence why I think the Songster is a bit better here. But nonetheless, I do think this will be a great card. We can search off the Irina, or if need be, put into Soul with Luquier's ability just to call out, mainly on that, again, on that first grade 3 turn to create better numbers overall. I run 3 of the Repel Mouse PG. It could also be the Recusal Hate. The important thing is that it's the PGs that if you have 1 or less cards in hand that you get to guard with it for free. This one should be pretty self-explanatory. And then, of course, one of the Elementaria Sanctitude. We're not a triple drive deck, so there's no reason not to run this card, as it bypass guard restricts and can sometimes be a free PG against certain matchups. For the triggers, I run 8 crit, 3 front, 4 heal, and the 1 over trigger. I do run the Stem Deviate Effect critical because I imagine just throwing it behind a grade 2 just to be able to hit over that, whatever the magic number is, over 13k, 23k, 18k, whatever it is. This card will help with that, and then put into Soul to maybe give another grade 3 power plus 2000, so then it can hit magic numbers, as well as give me an extra Soul for potential Soul Blast costs that I need in the future. I don't think this will be too relevant here, but at the same time, it can be a nice way to close out the game and just kind of pass around some magic numbers. We'll see if that comes up too much in testing, or if it's just better to run the 5k trigger. But 3 front, I think, is the more interesting thing here, and that's because this deck filters so much and has so much advantage that I don't think draws are necessary, and I'd rather just have the front to be able to give more power to my front row to make my attacks more devastating, and a 20k shield in the hand with how beefy this deck is just seems good as well. For regular heroes, just like all my decks, there's so many very different decks that I'm playing against that if I start noticing one over the other, I can easily switch them out for the effect crits, but for right now, I'd rather just have the higher shield value. And wrapping it up, I do run the Galmagaheld. This one I'm not convinced on over Obaria because this is a multi-attack deck, and I can see giving 100 million power to 2 rear guards is really, really strong. But at the same time, our weakest swing is definitely our Vanguard, so to have this over trigger kind of add that extra pressure to it, just kind of threaten an opponent and maybe able to randomly win games with my opponents just like, no guard. I think that's pretty good as well overall, but again, in testing, that is one of the things I'm going to keep in mind if maybe I find that whenever I check this Obaria might just be better. We might end up switching it out. So that's the deck list, a lot explained there. With that out of the way, let's get right into the games. So getting into game 1 here, I'm against the new Viamon's Bruce. My starting hand is actually pretty good. I choose to throw back the Luxual Songster because I would rather the Breathing Dragon right here. And honestly, a great hand, Lillian and PG for more bulkiness, Rising Dragon to start putting more cards in Soul, and also a good attacker, and then Luquier for Persona Ride. So obviously this matchup won't be very indicative of D-BT08 since Viamon's Bruce comes out in D-BT09, but at the same time, this was honestly such a hype match that I think it's totally worth it. And what you saw there was, I forgot Irina was not on place, it was on Ride, but since both my opponent and I are just testing our decks for the first time, it's all good. We're just testing, frankly. So I just threw a back shuffle of my deck and we called it good. So I just chose to swing here. No reason to call down anything else as I'd rather get the Breathing Dragon to Soul. And I check a Lillian, so even more bulk in my hand. I also chose to discard the Rising Dragon because I figured that I would rather keep these pieces. Arguably, I could have pitched the Lillian, and in hindsight, I think that would have been perfectly fine, and I should have kept the Rising Dragon because it's such a powerful piece. And here I draw to a Lillian anyway to pitch, but I wasn't too sure how much defense I would need, so I kept the Lillian for the extra 10k shield here. So my opponent, of course, setting up the Stephanie, which is nuts with the new VM on Spruce. I call down the Rising Dragon, throw the Breathing Dragon into Soul because I want that in there, and just kind of start aggressing. My opponent does check heal to offset some of that, but hey, still got in some damage, and now don't have to deal with the heal. So it goes into the VM on Spruce, uses the Jamil to build a board, and gets the double Jamil to be able to build an even bigger board, and just sets up the second Stephanie and just goes in. Since he's going first, makes sense. Just kind of wanted to get an early damage before I can really build up my bulk, and the higher damage, the less likely I can tank some of his attacks and just get defensive triggers. So I do take this first. I do take the Bruce swing because I really want to save the PG for the later turns, and he doesn't check any crits, and even if he did check crit, just more cards to get defensive triggers to help me block those. I do check a heal here, which is phenomenal, and I'm able to block the last attack. Arguably, I could have taken that, gotten a heal off, and denied one of my opponent's heals, but at this stage I figured I want to be at lower damage so I can take more of those hits. So here, using Luquier's ability to throw the order into Soul to call out Lillian, Breathing Dragon, Ianella. This is kind of the beginning I envisioned for this deck, and of course the Breathing Dragon just making phenomenal numbers. Brainwash Roller to round off those numbers looks amazing, and then of course order to give the Silverthorn Rising Dragon, and that's why I was locked to indicate that ability to go to Soul and call out a Silverthorn, which it will be calling out itself, is phenomenal. So here, swing 38k. Like, look at these numbers. This is out of Persona Ride. 4 attacks, 38k, 24. This one would be, what, 38 as well, and this will call out for 35 again. These numbers would be more devastating if it wasn't for the fact that Stephanie is giving Bruce that extra 5k, making it super tanky as well. So yeah, that's, I think, the even more fascinating thing is against a lot of the stuff in the D-BT08 meta, the only deck that really can get the extra buff would be Majesty Lord Blaster. All their decks are going to be impacted by this power way more. So my opponent just kind of taking it. Does go up to 4 damage here. Makes sense as he does run the Julian here. Doesn't have access to it, so he just calls down the Arwen after Persona Riding and just goes ham with these 4 attacks. Makes sense, though. Still really powerful. So my opponent opts to swing with the Jamil column, which I find interesting. What was his soul count? Yeah, I find it interesting he chose to swing here and didn't try to utilize the Arwen, honestly, but I don't know why my opponent did it. Might have just been simply a misplay, honestly, since this is his first time playing the deck as well. So check the order, but I already have 1 in soul, I believe, and 1 in hand, so I'm not too worried about that one. Just glad it's not clogging up my hand for just shield value, because I don't imagine this game's going to go long enough where I'll need the 4th order. I imagine that if it goes long enough where I would get the chance to play the 4th order, I'm probably just winning it off of those 3 attacks anyway. So I block this one because this column with the Jamil is going to be bigger, so I just opt to take this one, and now I'm at 5 damage, so I deny him the heal, and I also get 2 chances to heal here potentially, unless my opponent takes 1. So here, throw the counter charger into Soul, so I get to call it out to get a counter charge to make sure I have 2 counter blasts set up for next turn anyway. Get off the Rising Dragon and the Breathing Dragon because I don't have the Luxual Songster. Might as well just give my front row power as I do have the Soul here. Get to throw one into Soul off of the Rising Dragon, excuse me, and I do draw into another one of the counter chargers. Get to use the order here to give the ability to the Urseltji. I think that's how it's pronounced, the counter charger here. So going to be pointing to Soul, and I believe I do have a Rising Dragon in Soul to use this combo. So here my opponent does opt to guard it. Again, just showing that powerless. Bruce also has some tank to it with that Stephanie and the Jamil being really great defensive cards. So of course, recall the Rising Dragon. These numbers are nuts. 45,000. This one's going to be 63,000. Persona Ride plus the Rising Dragon's ability to gain so much power is so good. So my opponent taking that damage finally. I just get to throw a Rising Dragon and the Breathing Dragon in Soul. I debated throwing Brainwash Swirler, but I'd rather reset a Rising Dragon to get an extra draw here. I don't think I'll need the extra shield value. I mean, look, 3 PGs, 15k shield, 15k shield, 20k shield, 10k shield, 5k shield. Like, this is my weakest shield value, and it's the only one. That's kind of nuts. So really just, I think this game is perfectly showing off how tanky this deck can be. So here my opponent just sets up the Arwen, sets the Stephanie, because that's doesn't really have anything else in hand other than a PG. So here I opt to block this one. Well, I kind of have to block all of it, but I want to save the PGs because his numbers are only going to get bigger here with triggers, so I figured that's going to be the easiest one to block. And, well, I kind of have to go under all of it. And I have the cards, as you can see, to set up to PG all of these, even getting the free PG right there at the end. Just barely surviving. And honestly, drawing a crit does not matter. Just throw that thing into Soul, call out another, I think I call it the counter charger. No, I just call it Rising Dragon. I'm trying to end it this turn, so no need for the counter charge. Just call out the Rising Dragon. yeah, I had the soul for it, but call it the Rising Dragon, call out the Breathing Dragon since I'm not under Persona Ride, get as big as possible, use that order, and now I get to reset one of my Rising Dragons. These numbers are going to be phenomenal here for sure. So here, just swing 33k, gets over the 15k, and my opponent just opts to take it, knowing that he's going to have to rely on heals here with that hand. And I would have checked double front as well, which is kind of nuts. But yeah, that is game one. So moving on to game two. Moving over to game two here, my opponent opts to go first, as any good Bruce player would do. I think it's honestly just optimal to go first in Overdress as a whole. So here, interesting hand here, some really great pieces, but obviously I want to throw back one of the orders to find more pieces like the Rising Dragon. I keep the rest of this because this is a good call. Want to get this soul. This is some tank. Honestly, I think I should have thrown in everything but the order and the the Breathing Dragon, because as you'll see in this game, I really missed the Rising Dragon. I think that's a very important card to get in the early game overall, as it allows more hand filtering and just more, well, yeah, pretty much more hand filtering, and that's the other thing, better setting up the soul overall. So my opponent tries to aggress here, throw down 15k shield on the Vanguard swing, because that's the easiest to guard, and just take that one. My opponent does heal here, bit unfortunate, but that is perfectly fine. I draw into a copy of Persona Ride, which is so nice to see. And here I'm just debating on what I want to pitch. I decide to go Brainwash Roller as is least useful. And I get to, what do I find off the top? Let's see. I find the order. Yep, just get that order out of deck. I did not find a Rising Dragon, but I figured get a card out of deck that I don't necessarily want to draw into. And I get to use it from Soul anyway, so why not? So here I just with the Lillian at the Eden. Figured don't give him a Counter Blast, so he can't use the Jamil here. I just try not to give him any shenanigans, so he just moves up the Ivanka here and just tries to check a trigger. Overall, checks the Ivanka, checks the order. So no triggers here. So yeah, that play worked out for me. Drawn to a Songster. I discard a Lillian because I figure I want to keep the Songster as one of my pieces. Honestly, luxual Songster. As we'll see, it does come up, but honestly, in testing, I feel like it's one of the weaker cards. But here, I just get to throw the Breathing Dragon into Soul, call it a Lillian, Ianella, Breathing Dragon to set up some powerful columns. And here, I just call the other Lillian because I do not have a Rising Dragon, and this still makes phenomenal numbers. I almost called the Luxual Songster, but I figured I want to keep it to put into Soul to call out next turn once I Persona Ride it. And I do have 2 Persona Ride copies, so it's just more optimal. And use the order, of course, because I'm trying to get some early damage in here, and I do have the numbers for it. So swing with the 20k Lillian. I want to keep up the booster just in case he checks a defensive trigger. Swing Vanguard, recall the Lillian here. Still some pretty good numbers even without the Rising Dragon. Front trigger really does help with it, and another one of the orders. So I'm set up very nicely with the orders. No soul though. So here my opponent just takes it to set up for the Julian here. Get the double call off of it. Throw the 2 on soul, draw my heal. So again, just built up a really tanky hand. So does get the Persona Ride off, gets his Stephanie. He has 2 of them. And here's what I find interesting. My opponent opts, despite having the Ivanka, I'm not sure if this was a misplay here or not, calls just the Julian and then, yeah, just swings Julian. I think my opponent was worried about me having a really aggressive next turn and wanted to keep as many cards close to hand as possible when you can still create the 5 attacks with the Julian here. That's my best guess. I don't know if it was true, but yeah. So here, just saying, like, I think my opponent did say in chat, like, oh, I wish I could boost with it. But here, I just thought on 20k because it's really easy to guard with that as well. Honestly, in hindsight, I think I should have taken this hit here despite that being so easy, because I could just guard this one, and I should have tried to deny the Ivanka here, because now my opponent next turn, as you'll see, will be able to set up a better card than the Viamont's Bruce, and it would have also denied him another card in hand, because he does build up quite a big hand here. But instead, I opt to take this swing. So, actually, in hindsight, seeing that it was so big, maybe it wasn't wrong to do that. I was going to say that because the extra draw, yeah, no, I scratched that. I don't think that was a misplay. I think that was the right play for guard efficiency. I do check a heal, dropping me down to 3 damage as well. So here, just kind of debating what I want to do, because I do draw the Rising Dragon. So I'm debating wanting to call that one down first, because right now with my current board set, because I did not intercept with the Lillian, it makes it a bit awkward to call stuff. So arguably, I might have wanted to try to guard with the Lillian last turn, but there really wasn't too much in my hand that allowed me to do that, at least not with good numbers overall that I remember. Maybe I missed something, but here I decide just to overcall the Lillian. I call out the Luquier so I have more cards to put into Soul if necessary, or just bump it up next turn if need be. So in hindsight, well, I have the extra Persona right hand, so it's not an issue either, as I thought. But still be able to call the Lillian, the Songster here to try to get some extra draw, set the order. I use it on the Rising Dragon just to reset itself, because I want to keep Lillian on board, and of course would rather call the Rising Dragon to be able to attack with it. Well, I guess it doesn't matter. I could have swung Lillian, but this was bigger anyway. It was fine. So your check crit on Vanguard, pushing my opponent up to 3 damage, so the Songster will not come up here, but still just kind of put on pressure. Still some big numbers as well, and I don't have necessarily the tankiest hand like last turn, but still, well, now I do 5 15k shields, a PG if need be, a 10k interceptor. The Breathing Dragon I do not necessarily need in hand, and 2 damage to take, which I do want to take this damage to be able to use Luquier and the Order next turn to try to close it off, because my opponent does have 2 PGs in hand, so it might be a bit difficult, but at the same time, then it's just 5k, and I'll have 4 attacks as well. So I choose to guard this one because it was one of the easier ones to guard. Vanguard, I choose to no guard it because I don't think he'll check double crit here. Last game I saw some draws, so there's no reason to. Doesn't even end up checking. It does check a heal here, so it's going to be a bit hard to end the game. But here I end up PGing that attack to deny the Julian swing, and I take the Julian swing here and check OT. And this one is kind of unfortunate. I think here, I think I was right to deny it, because even if he had swung like the Lillian or denied the damage, it doesn't really matter because I still have the counterblast for Luquier. I can set stuff up. But because I checked the over trigger now, it's nice because I healed down one, but now I don't have the counterblast to do order and such. But at the same time, I don't think it's the end of the world here. It just kind of stinks. My opponent did heal down one, and I still have a decent hand if I can draw into some PGs. So looking back on it now, I don't think it was too bad that I healed down here. It's the big thing now is I just don't have access to the countercharger. And that's what kind of caused the hesitancy. I was debating calling this Rising Dragon to see if I can find my define the countercharger, but I ultimately opt just to set up the board and use 3 attacks, figuring I can out tank it. I mean, PG, drive check a PG, and then I get crit trigger. So my opponent is able to guard all of them, obviously, but at the same time, I think I might be able to tank this one out here as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So not necessarily the most ideal thing, but really I wish I just had the countercharger here. So here I'm just guarding these attacks, and here I think is a big misplay. I haven't seen many crits. I saw draws last game. I should just, and if I checked my opponent's crits, my opponent's seen 3 of them already. I probably should have just no guarded it here, and you'll see why. Does not check the crit here. I know it was a bit risky, but what this allows my opponent to do is I now have to take the Arwen attack here because it's just really, really big, and it just gives him the Ivanka. Arguably, I could have also PG'd that swing and just double PG'd the Vanguard, but what that would have allowed my opponent to do is just deny me damage with Julian, and then what do I do next turn anyway? So I do think that the best course of action would have actually been to take the Bruce swing in hindsight and risk the crit trigger, because I would have been able to conserve more guard in hand because I wouldn't have had to guard this final attack overall and still had the damage. So here, again, I still don't see the countercharger, so I just kind of need to build a board and hope that I can chip through what my opponent has left. So I throw the crit in there, and I just rebuild my board with Breathing Dragon, Luquier, Rising Dragon, just getting out the best numbers I can with the board setup that I have, and the Brainwash Roller does help with that quite a bit. Still can't use the order, though. So here, I just swing Vanguard first, see what I can check. My opponent, of course, just sets up, debates here whether he wants to do a 2 to pass or a no pass, and my opponent ultimately opts for a no pass because he has the cards in hand to facilitate it. And there's the countercharger, unfortunately. So and free PG there. And that's pretty much it. It was really close, but at the same time, and then drew into the other countercharger. So they were both at the bottom of my deck. That's just kind of how it goes. Maybe run another one of these copies because I can filter my hand so much, but at the same time, it's kind of hard to say because, well, there's going to be games also where this just clogs up my hand as well, and then games like this where I just don't see it. So I think that was the big thing for this matchup, was I just didn't find my countercharger, and I needed it to kind of keep up that pressure overall. So we're kind of seeing how piece reliant this deck is. But hey, the exciting thing is, since I lost this one, there's going to be a game 3. I said there's going to be a game 3, like just discrediting the fact that I played 3 games yesterday with, not yesterday, the day before, with Shoujo Doji. But here, not the best starting hand. I do have the countercharger, and I do have the order. I think the order is the most important card here, but everything else is kind of just extra pieces. I don't see my Persona Rides. More importantly, I don't see my Rising Dragons, which I think is the most crucial card. I don't see my Breathing Dragons either, and I draw into another order, so I'm really just not seeing the cards that I need. And here I throw in a Luquier, figure I can at least get Persona Ride to soul, or Persona Ride to hand to get some extra numbers, and to Brainwasher again. I'm just kind of checking all these peripheral cards that don't necessarily help me dig deeper into the deck to find my pieces overall. So here my opponent swings, I just no guard it, checks over trigger. And at this point, it kind of feels like this game's pretty much over. I have a subpar hand. I'm having to take 4 damage here, no heals. There's a Rising Dragon, another order. So again, and then I soul charge a PG here, and I feel obligated to grab it just to be able to tank it out, since now I have to face down a Bruce with plus 10k plus 1 crit, when normally I might have been able to take some of those Bruce swings. So this really, really hurts. I Brainwash Swirler and get over trigger, because that is the other thing that would have probably kept me in the game if I'd offensively checked my over trigger. So yeah, this really does hurt here. So I just call out the Lillian, the Irina. I don't even have the Breathing Dragon, so the best I can do is Irina here, get a Soul Charge to power up Brainwash Swirler, and I get another Counter Charger in here. That's not what I need. I call it the other one because I figured I'd just throw it to Soul with Luquier's ability. So I'm just doing my best to set up the numbers I can, and without the Breathing Dragon, these numbers are not that exciting. Honestly, I don't think they're terrible, honestly. Like, if this was a low roll against a deck that hadn't checked OT yet, I think this would be, it would be a low roll still, but it wouldn't hurt as much. So I do check a crit. That's quite nice. And I just opt to swing into Eden here. Or no, he intercepted with Eden. That's what my opponent did. Never mind. So that was, yeah, I just throw those 2 into Soul, draw a card, and just kind of start praying, because I still haven't found a Persona Ride because I locked one into Soul. Still haven't found the Rising Dragon. At least I have 2 BGs, so I know I'm fine this turn, but the problem is my opponent's only at 3 damage, and I still don't really have my offensive output at full capacity. So again, I think this game here, even despite over trigger, just kind of shows how piece reliant this deck is overall, and might be something to consider when trying to clean up this deck list, but I'll discuss that later. So here are my opponent's swings. Of course, swings are when I guard with that one, trying to deny the Julian. Here I have to PG the Vanguard, obviously, because I will die if I don't. And here gives it to the Julian. If he had, my opponent chooses to take it back and switch it over to the Arwen. But honestly, if my opponent had kept it on the Julian, that would have been game, because my opponent did that way, I could deny the Arwen and block the Julian. But if he had swung Arwen first, I would have had to take it. He would have bounced back and gotten a 4th attack out, and I would have had to rely on a trigger here. So here, unfortunately, draw heal, so painful. So I just try my best to build a board here yet again. Anything else, like, I want to check this card to keep me in the game. I believe I still have 2 heals left in deck, so it's not the end of the world. Yeah, I have 2 heals left in deck, but it's not looking too good. Soul Blast, Soul Charge a Brainwash Swirler. Use the order here. I'm just trying to scrabble together whatever I can. So just kind of start comboing off here best I can with some less than ideal numbers. There's my Rising Dragon. Crit trigger's interesting here. Definitely a nice card because he has a PG and a crit trigger to try to block the rest of this. And then unfortunately checks the Stem Deviate. If he hadn't checked it, I'm pretty sure I would have won there. I could be wrong. Look, the numbers went by too fast, honestly. So you all can check that, pause the video and check that in the comments. But yeah, that pretty much secured that my opponent would be able to guard it. I do check the hero here on the first swing, and I just took this one. I know I wish I could have denied the Julian here, but I need to guard the Vanguard swing and just rely on checking like these heals to try to be able to more easily guard these swings. So that's just kind of the reality of the situation I'm stuck in. And yeah, I don't find my final heal. And that is that. So overall, not the most exciting game, but I do think it shows an important aspect about Luquier that I will discuss in the deck wrap-up. So as expected, I love this deck. The resource looping that Luquier does, just the value that comes with it, the cool just kind of multi-attack combo with the order as well, is so much fun, and I really want to try to fix the consistency issue this deck was having. I don't think upping the counter charger anymore is the answer, but maybe running some Time Jaretts might be a great option as well to get more filter from Soul, and will be very useful. Like, I either go Time Jarett or the counter charger depending on what I have, and in this card, it does give me another way to filter out my hand, because I felt like I was super dependent on the Rising Dragon for that. I think that's the best part about this card, not even the power skill. Like, the power skill is awesome, don't get me wrong, but I think just the ability for this skill to help the consistency of the deck set up the Soul is just so valuable to this deck overall. So that's one thing that I'm considering, is just putting Time Jarett Dragon back in, because I think in games, I shouldn't even say game 2, I think it was just how it worked out that both the counter chargers were at the bottom of the deck, and that's just variance. But in that game 3, I think it was very, very evident especially, that I low rolled and I wasn't able to set up as well because I didn't see my Rising Dragon overall. And if I just had maybe like a Time Jarett, then I would have at least been able to dig more for either my Rising Dragons or at least like my Breathing Dragons to be able to set up more power. So honestly, I'm thinking of cutting some Luxual Songsters, as I feel like this is just a win more card. It sounds great in theory, but I think just being able to call the Breathing Dragon and be able to guarantee set it up, or not necessarily guarantee set it up, but be able to more readily set it up, will just be better in the long run. And maybe cutting some Brainwash Swirlers as well for some other cards that might help me set up a bit more consistently is something that I'm debating and probably will look into. So I don't know if Luquier is going to be a deck I build in person, but if I do, I'll probably be making a deck profile on it, because even if I don't build it in person, let me put it this way, I'm definitely wanting to test this more, as I do think this deck is a lot of fun. So might make another video on it. Let me know down below if you'd like a more comprehensive guide for Luquier with a more complete and tested deck list, because I'd definitely be down to make it. And of course, if you're a fellow Luquier player, please let me know what you think of the deck and what kind of cards are you running in your deck to maybe solve some of these consistency issues. I think trading notes is a great way for all of us to improve our list and just become better players overall. Also, before wrapping it up, I just want to give a quick shout out to my opponent in that game. Seemed like a really chill person. Great just chats back and forth, joking around, just a great testing experience overall. So I just want to give a special note, because I love seeing people on CFA, even if it's just through the chat, that are just great people overall, because you can certainly get some people that are not the most pleasant to play against. With that being said, though, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment down below your thoughts on this deck and what you thought of the video overall. I really enjoyed the feedback there in the discussion down below in the comments. If you're trying to find my other reviews of the decks, I'll have the playlist that they're all in a card above, as well as linked down in the description below. At the time of recording and posting this video, there are only 3 additional decks in there. I'll be uploading the final one, which will be Minerva, either end of this week or sometime next week. So if you are looking forward to that, please consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so you're notified when I upload that video. And of course, any further Vanguard content, as I do love making these videos because I absolutely love Vanguard. But with that being said, though, look forward to more content coming out real soon.